Good morning everyone, I am Ivy V. Osera and the topic that I am going to discuss for today is all about methods in establishing the validity and reliability of an instrument. So, here are the learning outcomes. At the end of my report, you are expected to know the different methods in establishing reliability and to learn the different criteria for assessing measure. So before we proceed to the method on establishing reliability and validity of an instrument, let's define first what is validity and reliability. So when we say validity, it is the ability of an instrument to measure what it purports to measure. Meaning to say, validity is defined as the extent to which an instrument measures what it asserts to measure. If research has high validity, that means it produces results that correspond to real properties, characteristics, and variations in the physical or social world. High reliability is one indicator that a measurement is valid. And when we say reliability, it refers to consistency of results. Meaning to say, the reliability of a measurement instrument is the extent to which it yields consistent, reproducible estimates of what is assumed to be an underlying true score. So, that's the reason why reliability and validity are important aspects of selecting a survey instrument. So, let's move on to the methods in establishing reliability. One of it is the test, retest, or stability. It is the same test is given to a group of respondents twice. The scores in the first test are correlated with the scores in the second test. Test-retest is a method that administers the same instrument to the same sample at two different points in time, perhaps 1-year intervals. If the scores at both time periods are highly correlated, they can be considered reliable. Problematic here are the observations that some students may be able to recall certain items given during the first administration of the test, and the scores may differ not only because of the unreliability of the test, but also because the students themselves may have changed in some ways. Of course, hindi naman natin ma-assure na same lang ang ilalagay ng respondents sa mga questions, and pwede rin na matandaan nila yung sagot nila before and then ulitin lang. So, because of that, here are some of the weaknesses identified in using test-retest method. And this is according to Carmines and Zeller in 1979. First is, even if the test-retest correlation can be computed and established, its interpretation is not necessarily straightforward. So, a low test-retest correlation may not indicate that the reliability of the test is low, but may signify instead that the underlying theoretical framework has changed. The longer the time between measurements, the more likely the concept has changed. So next is, reactivity refers to the fact that sometimes a phenomenon can induce change in itself. And lastly is overestimation due to memory. Because using the test-retest method, the person's mental recollection of his or her response, which he or she gives during the first measurement, is quite likely to influence the respondent, which he or she gives during the second measurement. Therefore, memory effects may influence reliability estimates. So, hindi lang po yun yung mga possible weaknesses niya. Pwede ding it takes a long time for results to be obtained kasi nga 2 times mo siya gagawin sa mga respondents. Another one is yung bias kasi in feedback between tests, participants gaining knowledge about the purpose of the test. So, they are more prepared the second time around. And tulad nga ng sinabi ko kanina, mood is not a stable characteristic kasi nga anytime or because matagal yung interval niya, pwede siya mabago. So another method in establishing reliability is the internal consistency. It is an assessment of how reliable survey or test items that are designed to measure the same construct actually do so. Internal consistency is an index of reliability of a test, also called internal consistency reliability or internal reliability. So one of it is the split half. It is a method of establishing internal consistency in which a test is given only once to the respondents. So the split half method assesses the internal consistency of a test, such as psychometric tests and questionnaires. There, it measures the extent to which all parts of the test contribute equally to what is being measured. This is done by comparing the results of one half of a test with the results from the other half. And the next one is Kuder-Richardson. So this is a method measures the extent to which items in one form of a test share commonalities with one another as do the items of equivalent test forms. This is also called item total correlation. So in this method, it refers to how consistent the results from the test are or how well the test is actually measuring what you want it to measure. And it can be measured through this formula. So using this formula, we can be able to know the consistency of the results. So, the RTT is the reliability coefficient of the whole test. The N is the number of items in the test. SD1, standard deviation of the total scores of the test, and the summation of PQ, tabulating the proportion of persons who passed, or P, and the person who did not pass or Q each item. So yun po yung ways on how to establish the reliability of an instrument. So let's move on to the other criteria for assessing quantitative measures. First is sensitivity. The instrument should be able to identify a case correctly. In a test, sensitivity is a measure of how well a test can identify true positives. And specificity, this is the instrument should be able to identify a non-case correctly. So this is a measure of how well a test can identify true negatives. Next is comprehensibility. Subjects and researchers should be able to comprehend the behavior required to secure accurate and valid measurements. And precision, the instrument should be discriminate among people who exhibit varying degrees of an attribute as precisely as possible. So precision refers to how close measurements of the same item are to each other. Precision is independent of accuracy. That means it is possible to be very precise but not very accurate, and it is also possible to be accurate without being precise. The best quality observations are both accurate and precise. So next is speed. The researcher should not rush the measuring process so that he or she can obtain reliable measurements. So, as a researcher, huwag mong madaliin ang process ng measuring kasi may tendency na mali-mali ang makuha mong result kasi ikaw ay on rush. Next is range. The instrument should be capable of detecting the smallest expected value of the variable to the largest in order to obtain meaningful measurements. Next is linearity. The researcher normally strives to construct measures that are equally accurate and sensitive over the entire range of values. And lastly is reactivity. The instrument should, as much as possible, avoid affecting the attribute being measured. So it is also known as the observer effect. It takes place when the act of doing the research changes the behavior of participants, thereby making the findings of the research subject to error. So to avoid that, one way is to conceal the purpose of the study. And that's all for my report for today. Thanks for listening.